First off, again, good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us for our exclusive KPRC2 Back to School conversation with Alief ISD Superintendent HD Chambers, to Superintendent Chambers, and all the participants. We want to thank you for taking time to address this important issue during such a time of uncertainty.
Yeah, we echo that. We certainly appreciate you joining us tonight before the first day of school in that district. So we're going to get started in just a moment after a brief opening statement by Mr. Chambers. But first, let's talk about some of the ground rules that we have in place during this conversation. All participants will remain muted throughout the conversation, but we do want to hear from you, so you will be allowed to submit your questions in the comment section of this Zoom Q&A. We ask that you do remain cordial and respectful at all times during the conversation. We will first address questions that were submitted via email and then answer questions that you, the participants, will be submitting.
And later on this evening, during this conversation, if you are comfortable being in front of the camera, you will also have the opportunity to ask your question directly to the superintendent. We ask that you use the raise hand feature located in your comment section, and then we'll then unmute you and you will be allowed to ask your question.
Okay, so we will be keeping time, and we ask that all the questions, we're going to ask all the questions that we can and get full answers, but I'm going to move us along to make sure that we do stay on track of time. So we do have a full hour to have this discussion, though. And at this point, Superintendent Chambers, we're going to open the floor for you to make your opening statements.
Thank you, Keith, Christine, and KPRC for allowing us to have this conversation. I'll be brief because really we want to get to the questions. I want to preface, before we start this evening, just preface, there may be questions that I don't have answers to, and I'm not afraid to say I'm not sure yet or we don't know, but I'll do the best I can to give the answers that are being posed, not only for Alief, because there's going to be some, I'm sure there's people watching this that either work or have children in other school systems where there's commonalities and similarities into just what's going on in public education in general. But I'll do everything I can do to give accurate responses to the question. If I don't know the answer, I will tell you that. So I look forward to it, and I'll do everything I can do to make this a meaningful evening for everyone on the call or on the meeting.
All right, Superintendent, we certainly appreciate that. And I know the families out there appreciate that as well. So let's dive right into our first question. It's coming from Elizabeth F. She asks, what are the plans for social distancing in the classroom, halls, cafeterias, and buses?
I'm going to answer that question, but I want to make sure everyone's aware I know a lot of questions that people have on their mind have to do with what happens when we go to in-person school. And as you know, most districts, including Alief, are starting at 100% virtual mode. What we are, so you're going to hear me say a lot of, we are planning for in-person. This is what we're planning to do. So as it relates to social distancing, we are going to phase in, when that time comes for us to begin bringing students back to school for in-person, we're going to phase that in using several thoughts. You know, some of our most needy, vulnerable students, children who are just struggling with the use of internet and virtual learning. But by doing that, we're going to limit the number of people, if you will, in our schools so that we can actually have classrooms where the square footage of the classroom has an opportunity to allow for 6 foot of social distancing or some meaningful distance for students. And as we learn more from our health officials and as we bring more students in, we will continue with the scheduling. I mean, the most critical thing we can make, a decision we can make to help social distancing, is the number of students in a school, and then specifically the number of students in a classroom. And we will be able to manage that for a certain period of time. And we're going to do that with the social distancing in mind. The second thing, and I'll let the next question come, as it relates to transportation and as it relates to lunch and as it relates to these other, quote, non-classroom environments, we're going to have to work really hard to ensure that we only have certain distances for students who are riding the bus, for example. You may see lunchtime looking like some students in a classroom, some students in a cafeteria, so that we can have use the number of students in a class or the cafeteria to create an opportunity to get to the 6 foot social distancing. So it will be one of the core pillars of our safety guidelines as we bring students back whenever that time is. But there's going to have to be management of number of adults and number of children on the class in the school building is the best way to give you a chance to really socially distance the way the health officials have told us.
All right, Mr. Superintendent, Christian W. has a question that pretty much piggybacks right off of the answer you just gave and the question that was asked. What does the transition for face-to-face learning look like for staff and students, and when will that information be shared?
That's the questions on everyone's mind. I believe everyone is they're nervous about that. Let me tell you what Alief is thinking and how we're going to approach this. Right now, we're starting virtual, and the reason we're starting 100% virtual is because not only across our community, our county, and our city, the positive cases, the hospital rates, the transmission rates, etc., they're extremely high in parts of our district. So we are looking at some point, whenever we feel comfortable, and when our local health officials give us some guidance on this, the way that's going to look is we will begin phasing students in. And I know I mentioned that earlier, but let me be a little specific. I would anticipate the way we would look at that is some of our most vulnerable learners, in which the learning gaps are getting created the widest, are our youngest learners. Think about your pre-K students, your kinder, your first, your second graders. Those students, while virtual is not ideal for everyone, it is really difficult to maintain and expect this age group of students to learn at the levels that we want without face-to-face. So we may be looking at our youngest learners and trying to phase them in over a period of time, going back to what I said earlier, based on our ability to social distance. Special education students. Everyone knows we have many special needs students that virtual learning does not work. And I know that. Our school board knows that. We are fully aware of that. And I know there are parents of these children who are really frustrated, not only with what happened in the spring, but going into a school year where you don't have the opportunity for your child to be in a school. We will, as quickly and as safely as we possibly can, prioritize those students as we begin phasing in. One more example of a student population would be some of your high school students who are taking many of our career and technology education courses that need labs, that actually need, they need more than just a classroom or more than just a Zoom. They need hands-on the equipment that we have for them. So think about your auto tech students, your welding students, your electrical students, your students who are working with cybersecurity, students who are working in these facilities that districts have built for advanced careers. Those may be pockets of our high school students that we bring in as early as possible so that they have access to those lab settings that you just can't replicate online. So that's the thinking behind phasing in. And the last part of the question was, when will people know about that? That I don't have that answer right this second. I will tell you that we will begin monitoring, and we've already started monitoring the health conditions, talking to our health officials, and begin game planning, if you will. What might this look like when we get the okay or the guidance that it's safe to start bringing kids back to school? So I hate to put a date on it. I hate to say, well, we're going to do it after Labor Day, or we're going to do it on September the 15th. Because as soon as I say that, we're not going to be able to do it, because I'm going to create a false expectation or a false date that I may have to pull back. And parents, quite frankly, and educators are tired of being told one thing and then the next day getting an announcement from someone else, whether it's their local school district or whether it's from the state of Texas or from our local authorities or from whoever it may be. So I don't know when that's going to be. I can just tell you that we're going to make the decisions based on our health officials and when we believe it's safe and healthy to bring our students and our staff back.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chambers. And our next question is coming from Janice H., asking, how many hours will the teachers be teaching online, and what will the online schedule be? What will that look like?
The online schedule for teachers it's going to vary depending on the grade level you teach and depending on the content that you're teaching your students. So let me say this first and foremost. A typical school day in person has a teacher in front of students 7.5 hours a day, right? They're in front of them, they're teaching them, whether it's a high school teacher who has different students coming in every hour or so, or whether it's an elementary teacher who's teaching that, a bunch of third graders, the same third graders every day. we're not expecting teachers to teach and be online, if you will, for 7 hours straight, looking at a computer monitor, no more than we expect our students to. So you're going to see an example would be a teacher may have a classroom, expect students to show up in a Zoom classroom on Monday morning from 8 to 10, and he or she may give their lessons and assignments. And the students may be working, some of them could be doing it at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, some of them could be doing it at various times of the day. But the number of hours that the teachers are expected to teach is going to be based in large part upon what the content they're teaching. And we have given training, and we've given, at least I hope we have, given guidance to our teachers to give them examples of what we expect out of them, what we expect out of our students, so that there's a consistent delivery of message, of learning that's happening that takes into account that we have teachers who have kids in their house. They have their own children. So we've got all those variables. So it's going to vary. It's going to be varied.
All right, thank you for that answer, sir. As we continue, just want to remind you all that you can submit your questions in the chat area. And remember, if you are comfortable being on video and you want to ask a question there, just use the raise your hand function, and we'll be able to get you to ask your question here live. This next question comes from Abimbola O. Hope I pronounced that correctly. If parents signified on their registration that they have a device, but it's no longer available for certain reasons, can they request for a device from the school? And if so, how would that be done?
Let me just context for all of the folks that are viewing this. Most districts, including us, we put out a brief survey going on a month and a half ago to our families, asking a simple question. Do you have reliable internet access? Do you have reliable devices? Should we have to start in this virtual mode? And we realize that answering that question can create, there's a lot of ways to answer that question if you're a parent looking at it. So the short answer to the question is yes. If you selected on your pre-registration, you said, I've got internet and I have devices, and you come to find out, or you don't believe that your internet's reliable, and you are truly in need. And I want to be clear about this. If you're a family that's truly in need of the internet, or you're truly in need of the device, then yes, contact your school, contact your campus, and make sure that they're aware that, hey, I know I filled out my re-registration form this way, but here's the real situation I have right now. And that's happening. We've been handing out devices for the last several days, and we have many families that are telling us, hey, I filled it out this way, but I didn't, I'm now in the reality of this. I actually need something. We're going to do the best we can to meet every one of those needs. I'll tell you, we purchased almost 30,000 devices and 16,000 reliable 4G hotspots. We believe we have enough to accommodate all of our truly needy families that need it without a big issue. What I would ask all of the Alief families and all of the Alief parents to keep in mind is, please, if you need it, if you have reliable internet access, if you have reliable devices in your home, I request right now that you maintain those and allow us to distribute these devices and these hotspots to the families who truly are in need, and so that we don't have a family left out that truly needs it. So, short answer: call your school. We'll work with you. But I'm respectfully requesting, please be of need versus of just want.
Okay, and Superintendent, our next question is coming from a new educator. So I guess first off, we should say thank you, because we know that those teachers are so important, especially right now heading into the new year. But Melinda S. is asking, I am a new teacher looking for my first job. I'm wondering how COVID will affect your hiring for this year.
Yeah, I agree with you, Christine. Thank you for going into the profession.
Yes.
Let me give you two practical answers. One, COVID has not impacted our hiring of teachers at all. We use enrollment projections, we use courses we're offering, and what are our needs? What teachers have retired or what teachers have resigned, and we are filling those positions literally as we speak, even in a COVID virtual environment. So that has not impacted our hiring process or practices at all. Now, the second, I guess, response to that is that if you've never taught before, and this is, I've told my staff that maybe I'm overly worried about this, but for our brand new teachers straight out of school, teachers who have never taught in the classroom before, asking them to begin teaching virtually, it's difficult enough when you actually have the students in front of you and you can kind of manage that. It makes it twice as difficult when they're on the other end of a screen, or you're reaching out to parents through a email or whatever the communication device is. I would tell this teacher to seek as much support. And if you're an Alief, and if you're still looking for a job, I'd go to Alief ISD website and apply. But our principals on our campuses and those experienced teachers who went through this last spring, we're counting on them to help these teachers, these new teachers, again, whether they're new to the profession or new to our district. So nothing has changed. We're still moving forward, full steam ahead with hiring.
All right, next we have a question from Charlotte Davenport, which she submitted in her chat. And Charlotte asks, she says, I'm curious about the calendar. Can you tell us more about the intercessional weeks that are scheduled?
Good question. That must be an Alief. So we adjusted our calendar, and what we provided are literally two, like a fall break. So think about a spring break in the spring. We provided a fall break the week of October 5th, that week of October 5th. And then we have another break that we have never had before in the middle of February. And then we have our spring break. So you've got 3 weeks there two of those 3 weeks we're not accustomed to. So the answer to her question about what's the plan for that, we are hoping that as we get into the school year, and I know it's virtual, and as we begin assessing our students in the best way we can, we're going to have teachers assessing. We're going to be providing teachers with some common assessments to measure just where students are. I mean, if I'm a fourth grader, if I have a child in the fourth grade and my child missed the last part of their third grade year, I'd like to know whether they're truly reading on grade level or how far behind do they fall. And that's true of any grade level, any content area. So we're hoping by that week of the 5th that we've identified students who may need additional remediation. And if there are teachers that are willing to want to work with those students, either one day out of that week, 2 days out of the week, I don't really know the answer to that, but we're going to try to use it in large part for teachers who are willing and interested in making a little bit additional money based on that, because they're off that week. That we're going to compensate them, obviously, but we would like to use it for some remediation and helping for students who have demonstrated over the first 9 weeks of the school year that they are further behind perhaps than others. And so that's one way we're going to use it. But it's built in as a break. It's built in as a break for employees and teachers to catch their breath, for us to identify the students who are needing that time, that additional time. And one last thing I will tell you that, and I don't know that this is going to be true of October's break, but it might be true in February. If indeed we get the school year started and an outbreak happens and either the state of Texas or local authorities shut the entire school systems down for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, a week, whatever it might be, we may be able to use the week break in February to make up for that time we lost whenever that shutdown may happen, so that we can stay consistent with our calendar and move through the school year without having to extend it on the back end, which in my opinion is not the most, I guess it's not the best use of time as we look at what's the best use of time for students. The best use of educational time would be in February as opposed to the first or second or third week of June. That's my opinion, but that's what we would be doing with it.
Superintendent, thank you. And we're also seeing that Charlotte Davenport says, thank you. I'm a new hire. So she wanted to pass along that graciousness there. Okay, our next question submitted by Natalie Reyes. She's asking, will there be any grace, leeway, understanding for us educators who teach and are responsible for the little ones at home who are also learning virtually within our district? What is the district's plan in regards to those who have to teach in this type of setting?
Yeah, the short answer is we're gonna be as graceful as and provide as much grace and support for those parents who are teachers and also have little ones in their house. And I know this is not an ideal response for everyone, but we're going to allow teachers that choose to who would like to be teaching virtually from their classroom. We're going to allow that to take place as long as we don't have we reach a threshold of number of adults in a building that creates a safety or health concern. So I know we've got some families that may work for. I mean, that might work. And we're also working for those families if they need someone, if we could somehow provide daycare or something for the children, their own children, if they choose to do that. But for the parent for the teacher who's also serving as the parent at home of school age kids or non-school age kids, it doesn't matter if they're raising kids at home. We're hoping the flexibility in the teaching hours, and that question came up earlier about how many hours will we be teaching. We're hoping that the flexibility that we're building into our Alief Learns at Home model will allow that teacher to do his or her job and then tend to the family and then come back and continue doing their job. But let me be clear. There is no great answer to that. There is nothing that I think a school system can put in place that's going to address 100% of that concern. And that was a major issue that we had in the spring. And resolving that issue is going to be really difficult until we're able to start bringing students and staff into our schools in a safe way.
All right, thank you for that, sir. This question comes from RRX. And the question is, what will happen to funding with children who are being poached by charter schools? And we don't know how likely it is, but we know just last week or the week before, the president talked about taking money from school systems that were not having kids meet face to face and giving those funds to parents so they could then put their kids in charter schools. Don't know how likely that would be at all, but the question is at least on people's minds. And so again, the question is, what will happen to funding with children who are being poached by charter schools?
So Keith, I think that's a real issue. I mean, I think that's an issue that not only during this time period, at any time of any given school year, that the charters are aggressively recruiting and advertising and marketing for students of all districts. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I say that. That's how they exist. What I would tell you is, what does it do to the funding? Yeah, it's an impact for every student. And this is not just Alief. This is across any school system in Texas. When a student leaves a traditional school district, and let's just use Alief as an example. If a charter poaches, if you will, a student or a family, and that student leaves Alief and goes to that particular charter, then we're gonna lose funding for that child. And so for every one or two or three or four, it adds up. And I won't get into the details of how much that is, but let me just tell you that it's a significant amount per child. And you add enough of those up, then you start getting to a point where, as a budgeting process and as a hiring process, districts have to start looking at, do we need this number of teachers to teach the grade level, which we're seeing a decline in enrollment because of students enrolling in charter schools. So there is an impact. There is definitely a financial impact. And I want to be really clear about this. A lot of people will say, well, if you lose the student and the money goes with the student, then that means you're not having to educate the student and you're not having to pay for the student. That's not true. Because the student leaves and goes to a charter, I still have the teachers, I still have the building, I still have utilities. Every superintendent in Texas still has to fund their budget before that child ever left. So there's not an economies of scale where you're able to diminish your expenditures because your revenues are being cut. And I think that's a critical message. And I'll end by saying this. I would hope that we're all educators, every one of us, whether you're in a charter, private, public school, or traditional public school. We're all educators, and we're all doing the best we can to educate our students and provide support to our families. Every family member I've ever met in my 35 years of doing this, all they want is the best for their children. They just want the best for their children. If they decide that the best for their child is a charter school and that's the decision they make, then I will respect that. But if they decide that because they've been recruited or they've been promised something that may or may not be realistic, and it's done during a crisis mode like we're in, then I don't think we're helping. When I say we, I don't think educators are helping to provide the quality education that everyone expects. So I'd love to have one of these meetings one day on charters and traditional public schools. And I know that's not the topic, but the question is a very relevant question, because it could directly impact school districts and their budget from a planning process, and it could impact teachers at some point.
So the answer to that question is the funding follows the student, but even when that student leaves, you still have bills to pay.
Yeah, exactly, Keith. And if you have just a handful of students, and I'm just going to, let's say you have a class of 22 students, and let's say 3 of them go to a charter school, and the money that follows those 3 students leave, I still have the teacher teaching the remaining 19. I still have the utilities that are providing utilities to that building. Nothing has changed on the expenditure side. Nothing. Heck, even if 11 of them left, if half of them left, nothing has changed. I'm still running buses because I've got to serve the remaining students. So yes, the money will follow them. The expenditures and the expenses will remain the same in the school systems.
Mr. Chambers, this next question is actually coming from a student in terms of social distancing once in-person learning in the classrooms actually gets underway, whenever that may be. Her name is Faith Hayes. She says, I'm a student in Hastings, and halls can be crowded quite quickly to the point where that may lead to physical interactions between students just based on like the sheer volume of kids in a hallway. When face-to-face in-schooling learning does get underway, how are the halls going to look to ensure the safety of students and teachers and administrators in the buildings?
Thanks. And thank you, Faith, for that question and for participating in this. I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. One of the variables that we will have control over, school systems will have a control over for a while, at least 8 weeks, is how many students we allow in the schools. So once we begin allowing students in schools, and let's just take Hastings. Hastings is a huge high school, 4,000 students. It's one of the larger ones in Texas, along with Elsick High School. And when we start planning for how we're going to bring students back and how we're going to allow them to either change classes and get into the hallway, like Faith is talking about, we're going to have to create some very unique ways of I guess, lanes. A lot of our middle schools already divide lanes. Think about driving. On your right-hand side, you're going in one direction. On the left-hand side, you're going in a direction. There's cones, there's tapes, there's adults kind of monitoring that. So I would anticipate, at least when we begin phasing, I would anticipate seeing clear directions, clear things on the floor directing you, physical barriers, cones, etc., and then teachers, people monitoring this, fully knowing that trying to corral a bunch of high school students and monitor every single one of them at every single minute may be difficult. But it's going to be things like that. Managing the number of students we bring in and testing these strategies. 2, perhaps not nearly as much movement in hallways as kids have been accustomed to, like the bell rings and everybody goes to class 6 or 7 times a day. We may have to monitor the number of times we allow students in the classroom and to begin moving, in the hallway and begin moving. And then 3rd, like I said earlier, a tremendous amount of adult monitoring and just training. And I want to speak to that just real quickly. There's no better trainers on planet Earth than teachers, particularly elementary teachers. If you've ever had an elementary child, or if you've ever taught elementary and you walk into an elementary school, within 2 days of school, they've got 4 and 5-year-olds lined up with their hands in their pockets, going to the restroom. We're going to have to work really hard to train our students and educate our students about what's the consequences of you not following these types of guidelines, particularly our older students, like Faith brought up. Because yes, not only are you going to bump shoulders or run into someone or just go hug someone because you haven't seen them in 6 months, but yeah, physical altercations, things that typically brew up in a high school, since the beginning of time. But we're going to have to manage that. We're going to have to manage that, and we're going to do the best we can with those strategies I just mentioned. And I'm sure there's going to be other strategies that we come up with that I haven't mentioned.
Well, thank you for that answer, sir. Next question comes from someone who would like to remain anonymous. The question is, If hours are flexible, why are students being told to follow fixed bell schedules?
Well, there may be, and as I mentioned, they're going to be flexible. There may be students in schools that are using bell schedules for some of their classrooms. It may not be a full 50-minute class 6 times a day. When I say flexible, I'm talking about the teacher having some flexibility and being able to create his or her schedule based on their schedule in a lot of cases. So if you think about and I'm thinking middle school and high school, if you think about teachers that teach in those environments, they have a first period, a second period, a third period, a fourth, they got 6, 7 periods a day. We do not expect that for 7 hours straight, or for 5 hours and then a lunch break and another hour, we do not expect every day of the week that teacher be online and students be coming in and out. There will be times where teachers are going to expect students to be on a certain bell schedule, but it may be short amounts of time periods, or it may be if a student, I'm going to use a term here that educators are getting to learn, but it may be in an asynchronous environment, which means you're not synchronously, systematically in a classroom for 6 or 7 hours a day. It means you're being instructed, and then you go off and you do your work. You come back at some point within that 24-hour period, and that counts as a class day. That counts as a school day. So my flexibility, when I say flexibility, I'm referring to the teacher not having to sit in front of a computer for 7 hours a day following a bell schedule. They have some flexibility there. Now, if we have Alief teachers who are disagreeing with me with that, or they're hearing differently, then let me know offline or somehow so I can clear that up.
Appreciate the clarification, Mr. Chambers. Our next question is coming from one of our wonderful educators. Her name is Elizabeth Webster. She writes, I am an experienced educator that does not feel it is safe for myself, family, and friends that I go back into the classroom. What are my options to teach online until I do feel comfortable? And then she goes on to say, my school is located in an area with the largest amount of COVID cases, and our building is old without proper ventilation.
Okay. On the proper ventilation, I'd have to find out what school, if that's an Alief school, I'd have to be told that our ventilation, I saw a question pop up earlier about ductwork and HVAC, and there's a tremendous amount of work that's been done over the summer to make sure that the filters and the things that we have control over under HVAC systems that are clean and prepared when this happens, when we bring students back. That the HVAC system and our air conditioning, et cetera, the ventilation systems are not contributing to a problem. So I'll stop there on that. On the question about options, and this is the let me give context. So school systems, Alief ISD, we've made the decision to go virtual, and we're going to stay virtual, like I said earlier, as long as we feel it's necessary. Now, the state of Texas, the Texas Education Agency, has placed some guidelines in place and some hard and fast rules that have to do with how much time can we stay 100% virtual, so that as we move forward through the next 4 to 6 or 7 weeks. So there's an 8-week transition period. So what we're going to begin doing is, and we started this, trying to identify what teachers are not comfortable and why are they not comfortable. And if it's and I'll just give you an example, if it's an underlying health condition that makes you feel unsafe, if you have a family member that you go to every day that has an underlying health condition, and those health conditions are going to be defined by medical professionals, and we're working through that as we speak right now. We're going to allow those staff members to stay remote, if you will, or virtual, for as long as we possibly can. Now, here's where the state, and this is why I brought this up with the state, some of the state requirements are that once a district has used up their 8 weeks of this random 8 weeks, I don't know where that number came from, but as if the virus is going away in 8 weeks and we can all go back to normal. But once a district has expired that, we will have the option of asking for a waiver from the state to continue at 100% virtual, so that this teacher's concern can be alleviated. But if the waiver is not granted, or the way in which the state of Texas originally had this written, we would actually at that point have to admit every student whose parent wants them to come back to school. So if we had 90% of the parents in any given school or any given district wanting their children to come back, as a district, we would have to accept them. And that's any district. That's just not Alief. That's every district across the state of Texas. The problem that creates, going to this teacher's question, the problem that creates is that let's just assume 75% of the kids come back, and we have a teacher that only teaches a class that she or he is the only teacher for that course. Then the state and employment laws, actually, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA accommodations, actually says, we can grant the accommodation until it becomes an undue burden on the organization. Meaning, your underlying condition is serious enough, but if the organization says your absence, even though it is legitimate, it's a legitimate health issue, your absence from work is creating a quote unquote, this is their words, not mine, an undue burden on the organization, then an employer would have the option of not granting that accommodation and asking that employee to come back to work. I'm not saying that's what we're going to do. I'm trying to put into context the situation that districts are in with this serious question about, I'm not comfortable for whatever the reason is, or I have a true underlying medical condition. That districts are going to potentially be faced with making these decisions over the next 8 to 12 weeks that are going to be based in large part based on situations they have no control over, which, going back to what I said earlier, if the state of Texas says we have to let students in for any parent that wants them to come in, if that number is so great that we have to have certain teachers in, then districts have to make decisions about how they deal with that. So we're going to be as flexible as we possibly can and work with our employees. But it's an issue. It's a legitimate question, and we could spend 2 hours talking about this because that's what's on teachers' minds. That's what they're worried about. That's not just teachers. Anybody that works in a school, that's what they're worried about.
Mr. Chambers, just a follow-up to the question about the fixed bell schedules. The anonymous person says secondary students have been told to follow their 7-period bell schedules synchronously. And then Miriam Collins adds to that. She says, Mr. Chambers, we were definitely told, and it sounds like Ms. Collins is a teacher, we were definitely told that we have to start and stop class according to the bell schedule. We are to start every class period with a warm-up and attendance, followed by a 15-minute live lesson. She adds that she teaches high school, so she is a teacher, has 2 little ones at home. Can you clarify the fixed bell schedule issue for us?
You bet. And the clarification may be that I was not completely accurate on describing what I was describing. What we're on her example about having the warm up and then the 15-minute, that there's no expectation that there's a complete 50 minutes every period for whatever the 7 periods a day or 6 periods a day that are in place. But I will clarify that without trying to do it on this. Let me get back with our staff and make sure that if I spoke incorrectly, then I will clarify that. But the bottom line is we're trying to create as much flexibility as we possibly can, while having our teachers teach. That there's a delicate balance here that we're all having to work through on being as flexible as we can and knowing the family situations that teachers have as well as our students. So let me clarify that so that I'm accurate and making sure that I'm sharing the right things with everyone.
All right, Superintendent, thank you. We appreciate that. Our next comment is coming from a viewer. This is in regards to technology needed for virtual or at-home learning. This viewer says, I have a concern that my first grader has no device, and I was told to wait for the teacher to contact me, but yet the school is starting tomorrow, and yet I've not received a phone call. What can you say to them?
I would strongly encourage you to call your school first thing in the morning. If you don't get an answer, email. Just if you don't get an answer, go to our contact us page on our Alief website. There's a place for you to be able to say who you are and where your kid goes to school, where your child goes to school, what the issue is. But for that, we've got the devices in the hotspots, and we want to get them distributed. So please contact your school ASAP. Again, if you don't hear from them, keep trying, but also go to our website because we are monitoring that. Contact us 24/7.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. A question from Aisha T. And this is a question that we have seen a lot of times over the last few weeks because the needs are so different. How will special education students who often need intense intervention be served virtually? You know, it's a lot of those students, it's very hard for them to interact and be taught online.
Yeah, that, as I mentioned earlier, that's the most, between our special needs students and our earliest, youngest learners, those are the most vulnerable students from any type of virtual environment. I guess our special ed department is working with families to provide as much support as we possibly can for not only resources they can access, but the way in which we can support them. I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier. This is one of those issues there is no great answer to. There is absolutely no good answer for how can we adequately provide what was provided in an in-person. What we can do is through the ARD process, the admission, review, and dismissal process, in which parents are in, where those decisions are made by schools and parents. What we can do is give our commitment that we're going to follow that ARD to the letter of the ARD to the extent we can in a meaningful way. And as soon as we believe it's reasonably safe and healthy, those are the students who are going to begin trying to get back into our schools as quickly as we can. But I'm under no illusion, no superintendent under any illusion that this is the best thing for those students. I know it's not. But I will also tell you that there's a lot of data and a lot of research that we're getting that talks about the vulnerability of the COVID for many of our medically fragile special ed students, that they're is more susceptible than perhaps others. So we have to be really careful and balance balance the need for the education, the issue that you just talked about, and balance the safety issue. And I'll say this, I was told by a lawyer a while back, they teach you in law school to be a successful lawyer, you need to be able to hold two completely contradictory ideas in your head without being troubled by it. And what the application that I take for that is the conflicting messages in my head are, how do I protect students and staff? And how do I provide a quality education? And in the environment we're in right now, as we sit here today, there is no way to prioritize both of those at the level in which families want, educators want, or school boards want. One has to be prioritized. It has to. We can't equally provide that. And I've made the decision, and will continue making that decision, that I'm prioritizing the safety and the health of all involved. And that doesn't mean I'm sacrificing. It doesn't mean we're sacrificing. We're just saying no one's going to be educated. We're just going to worry about our safety. But we're going to do the best we possibly can while those who are giving me guidance are telling me that safety and health should still be the priority that you're making your decisions based upon. And when you do that, when I do that, and I own this, when I make that decision, I know I've got special needs families out there that are struggling, and special ed students that are struggling. And we have special ed teachers that are dying to get to those students. They want them, but they also understand the safety component of it. So I had a special ed parent tell me about a week ago, she was concerned about us opening. She goes, because I'm not going to send mine, because I'm worried. Yes, I want my child to be in school, but I have read all the data that talks about how susceptible that special needs children, particularly those medically fragile students, how susceptible they are to the virus. And I'm just going to tell you, Keith, Christine, a year from now, I'm not going to look my staff or look a parent in the eye and tell them that a year earlier I made a decision that compromised their health or their safety. I'm not going to do that. So yes, it is uncomfortable and it is difficult for these special ed parents. I understand. And we're going to do everything we can do to honor what we need to do. But the safety and health right now is what's prevailing in my mind and basing my decision on.
Mr. Chambers, thank you for that. Also, we've been receiving a lot of comments, so we certainly appreciate everyone that has been submitting questions in our comment section. If you are okay appearing on camera and you have a question for the superintendent, just hit the raise your hand feature and we'll get you here. But in the meantime, Superintendent, we still have a few more questions to get through as we have about 10 minutes left in our conversation. Time certainly flies when you're having fun, right? This next question comes from Faith Hayes. As a student in 11th grade, this is the year I start to look at college and universities. How will my college counselor help me with this process, be online versus in person?
That's going to be that. I'm glad Faith brought that up. We don't talk a lot about, that doesn't get a lot of public conversation. But we had students who were seniors last year that were and many of them in the middle of just getting notified as to whether they were accepted or not. So and I'm going to have to get more information on this. So this is one of those questions I'll tell you, I don't have all the answers to right now. But our college, in Alief, we have college and career access centers. And it's literally adults that's their job. It's to work with students. In Alief, we have a lot of students who are first-time college goers, so they don't have the luxury or the luxury of having family members or someone who's gone through this before. But we're going to begin working to make contact with our seniors through our college and career access centers as soon as possible, as soon as we kind of get through the opening, if you will, of school and kind of figure out what we need to address and what we don't need to address. But I will tell Faith and I will tell all the other juniors and seniors that we are not going to let this virtual environment sacrifice anything that we do in terms of providing resources, support, answering questions, giving you guidance. We're going to do everything we can do to continue that. Now, here's my ask of students, and Faith, you can share this with your friends and others. We can only do so much. We are going to have students meet us halfway. There is a lot of times students, and I'll just be blunt with you, sometimes they just wait for the adult to take care of it for them. In this case, we're going to ask you guys to meet us halfway and allow us to work with you and make sure that we know if there's a concern or a question you have. Make sure your school and your college access center counselors know what's happening, and we will do our part, attempt to do our part as well. But there's going to be a lot of communication flowing as we get into the school year. But right now, our primary focus is just getting the year off the ground tomorrow, and then learning from what happens over the next couple of days and then improving as we go each day.
All right, Mr. Chambers, kind of a combo question here from Jane and also from Ronald Kotz. They have pretty much or similar questions. Jane asks, what about sports and fine arts classes? And Ronald Kotz adds, what criteria will you use to allow extracurriculars to take place? We know the UIL has a role in that as well, but how about an Alief ISD?
You bet. So the short answer to that question is what's going to guide my decision on extracurriculars, whether it's athletics or fine arts or whatever it may be, is going to be the same guidance I'm using to make decisions as to whether we bring students back to school. So as long as we are in a virtual mode, we will not be having any quote unquote after school activities, UIL or otherwise. Now there may be some activities, I want to be clear about this, there may be some activities, clubs, organizations that can meet virtually and continue to do things virtually. But for those physical activities, marching band, volleyball, football, cross country, all the things that we value in our school systems, we are going to that they are going to follow the same mode of thinking I'm using for bringing students back. So for example, when we get to a point where we're making a decision to bring students back, phasing them in, while we're making those decisions and using the data and the health officials to help us, we will also be asking the same questions about, is it safe to begin bringing students back for these activities? So yes, the UIL has a huge role in this in terms of the things they're allowing or not allowing, but ultimately we're going to make the decision based on the health and safety of our students. And we will consider allowing these to begin as soon as I begin considering allowing school to take place for in-person learning at some point.
Superintendent Chambers, our next question is coming from Yvonne, and this has to do with if you have tested positive for COVID over the past few months. She says, if an employee tested positive during the summer, will they have to test negative before returning to work, are there any options for employees who have to work on site but their kids have to learn from home?
So to the question about testing positive, whether it's over the summer or at some point in the future, in the past, I'm not dodging this question, but I'm going to ask every employee in Alief that if you have tested positive and you're on the other side of it, if you will, you've gone through it, you need to contact our benefits department, Ms. Katina Gordon, our Director of Risk Management. And the reason I'm saying that is because we have several expectations and several things that we need to put in place for these types of situations. But they will only, at some point, yes, the short answer is they're going to need to demonstrate that they are no longer testing positive for it. But I would highly encourage any employee, this is probably true of any district, but in particular Alief, I would encourage any employee to please contact our risk management office, talk through what you've experienced, what you did, and they will give you guidance as to what the next steps are. That's the best answer I can give to be consistent. Now, I'm sorry, you asked another question. There was a part of that question had to do with children.
I think we sort of lost our place there, but I think that works with the time that we have remaining, Superintendent.
Okay. If I didn't answer that part of it, I'm sorry to whoever asked that. I'm sorry.
All right, and with looking at our time, we only have just a couple of minutes left, and we want to make sure we get out of here before the feed ends. And so I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us this evening. We hope that this conversation was helpful and also informative for you all.
Yeah, and for any questions that were not answered, or if you have any additional questions moving forward, which you most likely will, please feel free to submit those to our website, clicktohouston.com. You can also check out clicktohouston.com/backtoschool. That's with the number 2 in that address to look for any information that you still may have questions about. There's a lot of resources in one spot for families in Alief ISD and really all the area school districts as we head back to school. We know there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of answers on our website for you. So again, we certainly appreciate Superintendent Chambers joining us, and also all of the Alief ISD families that tuned in this evening to continue a really important conversation.
Yeah, this year is going to be very, very different, but we hope it's still a great year for everyone involved. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you for having me.